This week on Oasis by the Sea, Pastor Keith teaches condemnation from the book of John, chapter 7, verse 53 through chapter 8, verse 11.
The word on the screen right now is not a very nice word. Condemn isn't a feeling we like. Feeling condemned isn't pleasant. To condemn someone is to finalize their judgment. It's over. No more arguments, no more explanation, no chance for mercy, no forgiveness. To be condemned is for the outcome to be certain. And I know that we can all, there's probably someone in the room that can come up with some story of someone who was condemned and then they got out of it. I understand that in reality, condemnation doesn't always follow through. But that doesn't change the meaning of the word. The meaning of the word means that you've been judged, and that judgment is final. It's what's going to happen. If you have ever felt condemned, you probably remember that moment. If you knew that you'd done wrong, that feeling would have been the finale of a chain reaction of guilt and shame, fear, maybe the temporary hope of getting out of it, the embarrassment of your actions coming to light, heavy dread as the judgment was passed. If you felt innocent, well, that's the stuff of epic stories, isn't it? The innocent person being condemned. It's the story of Jesus. He's an innocent person who ends up being condemned. Few frustrations compared to the futility of fighting against unjust accusations only to eventually lose. Suffering condemnation when we're innocent pierces our sense of justice is exceedingly bitter. Feeling condemned either way is one of the most horrifying experiences any person could have. In John's account of Jesus, he has already dealt with Jesus and his relationship to condemnation. Let's look at John 3:17. This is during Jesus' conversation with a guy named Nicodemus. Nicodemus is part of the Pharisees. They are a group of very proud people who condemned a lot. And this is Jesus talking to a member of that group, a group that did a lot of condemning. He says, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." We studied this earlier in the series. And isn't it fantastic that the one person who probably had the right to condemn everyone didn't come to do that? Just savor that thought for a moment. God knew every thought we had, every action we'd done, both public and private. He knew the lowest points of our life. And despite everything he knew about us as a people, us as a planet, us as individuals, instead of coming to condemn, he chose to do something else. He chose to come with an agenda not to condemn, but a plan to forgive, to restore, and to power, and to bless. That's what Jesus came to do. He came to not condemn, to rescue people under condemnation. People who had been condemned, he came to fix that condemnation, to make them better. It's worth noting, like I said before, who he said it to, a Pharisee. Pharisees are going to figure not just today in what we look at today, but they're going to figure very prominently in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be in a section of John where the Pharisees and Jesus are going at it pretty hard. And their condemning attitude and nature will be at the front, and Jesus' forgiving nature will be also clear. Pharisees were the sort of people who walked about worrying that the filth of the common people might sully their robes. They were arrogant and prideful and condemning. Jesus essentially told Nicodemus, God sent his Son, and he's nothing like you guys. God sent his Son, and he's not like you. You think you're holy, you think you're godly, you think you're all that. You pride yourself on being so godlike, and yet when God came, he was nothing like you. That's what he says. And Jesus proved his words and the way he lived. In Mark 2:15, we read that he ate with tax collectors and sinners. If you don't understand why a tax collector was a big deal, they were a traitor to their country. They were considered serious scum. And sinners were people, they had that title sinners because their lifestyle choices made it clear that they could not be following the law. Prostitutes definitely landed in that category. You could not be following the law and be a prostitute. Therefore, you were a sinner. You were a sinner by trade. You were a sinner by lifestyle. You were a sinner. You could not possibly stay up with the forgiveness and sacrifices necessary to deal with the way you lived. Mary Magdalene, a follower of Jesus from early on, had been delivered from 7 demons. History paints her as a former prostitute, although the Bible doesn't actually say that. But in the eyes of the religious elite, any woman with 7 demons certainly probably deserved the situation she was in. But Jesus famously didn't condemn her, he delivered her. He fixed it. His disciple Matthew had been a tax collector, one of those reviled people. Jesus called him, forgave him, restored him anyway. So Jesus' life matched what he said. He said, I didn't come to condemn, I came to restore broken people. And what he did said exactly that. He is the rabbi, the teacher, that's what rabbi means, who will forgive anyone of anything. As he said, he doesn't condemn, or at least doesn't condemn for the same reasons that other people do. We'll get to who Jesus does condemn in the weeks to come. But it isn't the usual suspects, the wicked, the broken, the demon-possessed, the drunk, the sexually impure. Jesus seems to be perfectly comfortable forgiving such people and restoring those people. So that's some background we have to know, because the Pharisees going to set a trap. They're setting a trap for him, and they're setting the trap based on that reputation. It's the reputation of Jesus that he has already that makes this trap possible. This trap wouldn't be a trap without their reputation. Okay, so we're going to talk about when we get there. Now we need to catch up to where we are in the book of John. Jesus just finished a week of preaching in the temple during the Feast of Booths. Some had believed he was the Messiah, some believed that he was the prophet who would usher in the Messiah, and some hated him. We talked about this last week. Neither of the first 2 groups, the ones who believed that he was the Messiah or the ones who believed he was the prophet, would want him dead. So at this point, unlike before that previous week when the Pharisees felt like if they just got their hands on him, they could kill him, that's changed. Too many people in Jerusalem now not only know him, but think well of him. The climate of the city has changed. The population and fame of Jesus has surged, and he isn't going to be as easy to get rid of now. And that's where we pick up at the end of that week, starting in John chapter 7. We're going to start with chapter 7:53 to chapter 8, verse 2. This is right after his last preaching on the day of the Feast of Booths. And everyone went to his own home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. Jesus comes back to the temple. He is now going to stay here and teach for 2 whole months. How do I know that? Well, if we skip ahead really quick to chapter 10, verse 22 of John, it talks about the last time Jesus teaches at the temple during the season, and it says at that time the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, if we keep going to verse 23, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. Winter. So Feast of Booths happens in October. It's a harvest festival. It's in that time of year. The Feast of Dedication has now been merged and mostly taken over by Hanukkah. That's in December. That's 2 months. So in the next couple of chapters, we have just a few excerpts of Jesus' teaching during 2 whole months. It's obviously not a record of 2 months of teaching. It is his carefully pulled out moments from that 2 months. And a lot of it's going to have to do with the Pharisees. And John is going to use these 2 months, and he's going to talk a little bit about the ongoing battle between Jesus and the Pharisees that is going to lead up to their hatred of him and their eventual scheme to use the Romans to kill him, because they're never going to be able to pull it off as Jews. So that's what's going on. And we pick up right there. Now that the scribes and Pharisees can leave the Feast of Booths without causing a scene, they waste no time in trying to end this Jesus problem. They hatch a plan. An ugly, wretched, despicable, inhumane plan. And we read about that plan in John 8, 3 through 6. And the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now, in the law of Moses commands us to stone such a woman. What then do you say?" And they were saying this, testing him in order that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. This is so many kinds of wrongs it is difficult to describe. And quite frankly, I was so angry when I was writing this sermon about how they did this. I was crying at my desk. This is horrifically horrible. Let's just talk about the test first. The test is Jesus has this reputation of kindness, forgiveness, restoration. He has in his inner circle people who may have been prostitutes before. Prostitutes are definitely guilty of adultery. And so they're like, look, there's no way he can condemn this woman. We're going to bring her and we're going to say, put her to death, and he won't be able to. Jesus is too soft. There's no way he's going to say, kill the woman. And we're going to say, look, the law of Moses says kill her, and he won't be able to do it. And then we'll have him. Because he can't be a prophet of God. He cannot be someone that God loves if he disobeys the law and doesn't respect the law. Can't do it. And that's our trap. Our trap is to prove to everybody Jesus isn't going to follow the law. That's why it's a test. That's the intended plan. So in the midst of that plan, let's just talk about what's so awfully wrong about that plan. Let's just start with sexism. Let's start with that. This is not how the law that they quoted reads. It does not read, if two people are caught in adultery, kill the woman. Let's read what it says in Leviticus 20, verse 10. If there's a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Okay? The adulterer and the adulteress. Also notice where the focus is of the thing. If there's a man, the original focus of the entire command is it's actually on the man. Why? Well, because if men were supposed to be the spiritual leader in a home, then they had the greater and ultimate responsibility for sexual purity. I am so frustrated with Christian families where the woman is driving the charge for sexual purity and the man is way, way, way behind. If the woman was caught in the act, then they know who the man was, don't they? He was there too. They couldn't have caught them in the act without knowing who both parties were. But he's not there. There's this very old excuse, as old as Jesus' time, probably older than that. It's an excuse that demonizes women and excuses men. I've heard it said out loud. I heard it as early as a teenager. I heard it again in the military. It's a lie. Here's the lie. It's up here on the board. Men cannot help themselves. If they're tempted by a woman, that is a dirty, ugly lie. But I've heard it said. History tells us that in Jesus' time it was very uncommon for a man to be killed for adultery, but women were. Those evil, tempestuous women who play upon weak, helpless men. That's the scene. That's the attitude. She preyed upon me. It makes me want to vomit. It makes me angry. It makes me angry that this woman is here, but there's no man. It makes me angry that whatever man was in this circumstance would let her face this judgment alone. That he wasn't standing there going, no, it's on me, my responsibility. I did this, leave her alone. There's no man standing up for her. There's some guy shrinking, hiding back in the shadows, letting this woman face death, and he's perfectly willing to sneak out and not get any damage, not even get known who he was. That is a slime ball. How dare men out of one side of our mouth say that we are stronger, that we're spiritual leaders, and then whine out of the other side of our mouth about how we couldn't control ourselves. It is the nature of an abusive relationship for one party to claim all of the authority, but then cast the blame for failure on those that they say that they lead. That is an abusive relationship. The entire scene reeks of chauvinism to me, that this woman stands alone when they were caught together. The second thing that bothers me, who is this woman? Let's talk about the woman. Their goal here is to test Jesus. They're willing to kill someone just to make a point. That's about the most dehumanizing attitude I can possibly think of. We are happy. You're such an object. You're such just a thing that in order to make this point about a teacher, to prove that the teacher is teaching the wrong things to make him unpopular, we're totally willing to kill you. That's absolutely objectifying, dehumanizing. She's facing death so that some men in power can make a point, all to see if Jesus, the friend of sinners, will follow the letter of the law. The Bible doesn't say who she is, and what do I mean by who she is? Who is this woman? Obviously, we aren't going to be able to tell the exact details, but I'd like us to consider just two basic possibilities of who she is. I always imagined her growing up as some normal neighborhood lady caught with another guy, and that's possible. But as I spent this week thinking as I do and praying as I do, that became less likely. Let me explain why. This is the first day the religious leaders have had to address Jesus directly. They've been busy with the Feast of Booths. They've been officiating that. Had to be there. Perhaps as they did the Feast of Booths during the week, they came up with this plan, but they hadn't had much time to enact the plan. So how do you find a woman who's an adulterer when you want to find a woman who's an adulterer? How do you do that on demand? You find a prostitute. That's how you do it on demand. If you want to be able to find a woman when you want to in the act of adultery. So you find a prostitute, you wait, you see the client come up, you wait for them to go wherever they're going to do to consummate the act, you barge in, you tell the client to scram and drag the prostitute off. I'm not saying it had to happen that way. I'm just telling you that as I look at the entire scenario and the time crunch and how convenient it was that they found this woman in adultery in the act, it seems more and more likely that that was probably how it happened. I mean, who's going to miss a prostitute anyway? She already deserves to die. It's just nobody had gotten around to it yet. I'm saying that sarcastically. They didn't see her as human. She was filth anyway. Maybe she was just a woman. That's also possible. No matter who she was, she's dragged into God's temple. Whatever else this woman is, she's Jewish. She's dragged into the high temple of her God through the multitude of people in the courtyards. And there's several. Through all the people, she's dragged by the Pharisees in her shame. Through all the folks in the courtyard, all the way through all the people that Jesus is teaching as he sits wherever he is. And she is dragged through all of that in her shame. An unannounced, very public trial in front of random strangers. Condemned to die. If this woman isn't a prostitute, the horror, the shame, the fear, the unreality of this whole thing must have been completely overwhelming. If she is a prostitute, maybe less shocking. Maybe the scene is one that haunted her at night when she tried to sleep. Maybe it's something that she feared. Maybe it was one of those worries that aches inside of us and she doesn't know how to change her life, and yet she's living every day knowing that at some point someone just might kill her because of what she's doing to stay alive. What kind of life do you have to have if you're a prostitute in a city where the penalty of doing what you do every day is death? How desperate are you? Whoever this woman is, she's in front of a crowd, in the temple of her God, in front of a man she's never met, while her darkest actions are made public to everyone and her death is demanded. I hope you can sense just a little bit of what it might like to be that woman, because we're going to come back to that. Because the truth of the matter is, we are that. We are guilty. There's a solution to that guilt. And then Jesus makes a power move. Do you guys know what a power move is? Ever hear of a power move? Power move, things like you shake someone's hand and you twist counterclockwise to put your hand on top. That's a power move. I didn't even know what a power move was until recently, but in the last few years, I realized that this is now a thing. There are people who practice power moves. I don't know if you knew that. Things like that handshake thing, or purposely sitting down when everybody else is standing up. It's designed to show that you're comfortable. You're an authority. Wow, there's just, I didn't know this. Choosing specific seats at a table or deciding where you're using. People actually do things to exhibit power. I'm not sure that I'm a fan of a practice skill in this for the purpose of arrogance. Nevertheless, Jesus is power moving the snot out of these religious leaders. He is seriously flexing. One, he's ignoring them. He is flat out ignoring them. He doesn't stand to honor their authority, which would have been normal and considered appropriate. If he was sitting, that's what it said earlier, right? He was sitting down teaching the multitudes. They walk in. The appropriate thing to do when these religious leaders, these important people, would have been to stand and acknowledge their presence. He does the opposite. He bends down. He doesn't look them in the eye. And just to make sure nobody thinks he's bowing, he's writing on the floor in the temple with his finger. Which means what? Everyone's watching Jesus. That's what it means. Guess who's now invisible? The woman that came in with the guys. Oh, they may have been staring at her before, but nobody's staring at her anymore. Everyone's watching, what is Jesus doing in response to the Pharisees walking in? Everyone's wondering what he's writing. Jesus has insulted them. He has given their ludicrous, disgusting actions all the attention they deserved, which is zero. He has drawn every eye to himself and hasn't even said a word. He hasn't said anything. And yet he has completely commanded the situation by the way he's acted. It is masterful. And the next verse tells us they just kept asking for a while Jesus keeps ignoring them. Let's look at the first part of verse 7. But when they persisted in asking him, persisted is not when they asked him again. Look, in the Bible, you may have read several times that it says something like blah, blah, blah. And when they had done it a second time, when they had gone over and put down the nets, but then they put it down a second time. There's a very specific way to say a second time. Persisted is they were asking. Can you see them, the leaders, standing there ever more awkwardly, this disheveled woman in tow, asking Jesus repeatedly while he calmly ignores them? Can you see their temperatures rising, their voices getting louder? I know you have to imagine that. That is not in there. What I'm saying is that if they persisted, if they continued to persist in asking them, that's what people do when they persist. Hey, are you going to listen to me? Are you going to listen to me? Are you going to listen to me? Hey, you, I'm talking to you. Are you listening to me? That's what I'm reading into this a little bit. I understand that I'm reading into it a bit. Jesus is unruffled and calm and confident and quiet, writing with his finger on the floor. Imagine the crowd that had been listening to Jesus teach, watching this drama play out. How is this going to resolve? And when they had persisted, nagged, demanded, and revealed themselves as the petty bullies that they really were, then Jesus stands up. And we get to verse 7 and 8. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up. And he said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." And then again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. I have to tell you that I think there's more going on here than just his words. Now, the reason I think that there's more going on here than just the words is because of how everyone reacts. There are multiple people in this situation. There's Jesus sitting, and then there's just the original crowd listening to him. They didn't bring in the woman. They aren't accusing the woman. They're not ready to stone the woman. They were just there watching Jesus teach. They are not part of this drama. They're just hanging out. They're just watching. They're just witnesses. And then there's the people that brought in the woman. Then there might be anybody else in the temple who's just doing temple stuff. There are multiple people around. I think the glory of God is present. The glory of God that reveals sin, that convicts of evil. Before I read this, remember where Jesus is, what he's doing, everyone there. Let's look at verse 9. again, and he was left alone. And the woman alone. Nobody stays. Not the learning crowd, not the scribes, not the Pharisees. Jesus didn't tell anyone to leave. He said, if you have no sin, go ahead and start heaving rocks. He never said leave. He just said, if you're the one who hasn't sinned, you can heave rocks. He doesn't say leave. The law says what it says. The law condemns. Here's the problem. Here's our problem. The law condemns everyone. There are no people who the law has not condemned. Jesus didn't have to say it. There in the presence of Jesus, the perfect Lamb of God, nobody needed to be told. They knew. The Holy Spirit blasted past their excuses and their pride and their prejudice and their sexism and their superiority, and they were pierced, one and all, every single person present. They were pierced and they went out. They left. I'd say they went out grappling with the enormity and weight of their own guilt. I know someone who had that exact encounter, someone who God did this exact thing, blew past their pride and defenses to personally show them the depth of their own failure. And it wasn't pleasant for them, but it did change their life, and it continues to change their life to this day. Now imagine being the woman again. Imagine the eerie silence. One by one, the footsteps echoed into the distance as each person in the room decided to leave until they're alone. Utterly alone. Just her and this man Jesus, and he's still writing on the floor. How long does he let her stand there? What's flashing through her mind? This is not any of the ways she had imagined this could go, right? Like, she got grabbed by these Pharisees. She gets dragged to the temple. I'm telling you, the moment right here that she's experienced was not in any of the choices she possibly could have imagined this would go. This is not in that list. This isn't it. And she's standing alone with this guy writing on the floor with his finger. How do these events that just happened fit any scenario? He is unlike anyone or anything she has ever encountered. If she is a prostitute, he isn't lusting after her. I mean, isn't even looking at her. How many times has she endured the I'm judging you, but I want you at the same time stare? And Jesus isn't doing that. Not this guy. What's going to happen? What do I do? And then into this empty silence, he finally stands. It may have only been seconds, surely it felt like hours. He stands and he asks her a question. He doesn't ask her if she was guilty. He doesn't ask what happened at all. He doesn't investigate her. He doesn't cross-examine her. He doesn't do anything about what she did. He doesn't even ask any of those questions. He asks a strangely obvious question in verse 10. And straightening up, Jesus said to her, Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you? As if he doesn't know the answer to the question. Jesus isn't asking because he doesn't know the answer. He's asking because he wants her to understand the answer. He wants her to say it. He wants her to say, there's no one left to condemn me. He wants it to come out of her mouth. He wants her to get it. Nobody has the right to condemn her. She heard what he said. She felt the power of his holiness just like everybody else. When she entered the room, there was only one person aware of their sin, the woman. But now she's been joined by every other person who had been in that place. Now all of them are fully aware of their sin. She walked in aware alone. Now she is joined by everybody. Everybody's aware. They are now equal. Not equally good, equally broken. Jesus has leveled the playing field. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Jesus has publicly demonstrated that concept. And everyone who had been there now knows the truth in a keenly personal and powerful way. But Jesus doesn't leave her there equal in her failure. He restores her. Something amazing happens in chapter 8, verse 11. And she said, No one, Lord. No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Woman, neither do I condemn you. Go your way. From now on, sin no more. She didn't call him rabbi. She didn't call him teacher. She didn't call him sir. She called him Lord. This is one of the first times in the entire book of John that someone calls Jesus Lord. It wasn't necessarily the automatic things that she should say. In fact, not at all. She should have said rabbi. They started with some curious people who wanted to hear what Jesus had to say. They left grappling with the conviction of their sin. Then came some proud religious people who hated Jesus and judged themselves as righteous and other people as vile and unworthy. They also left grappling with the conviction of their sin. One person came condemned in their sin, caught, convicted, guilty, ashamed, without hope, without dignity. She confessed Jesus as Lord and left forgiven. Out of all the people, only one left free. Free from condemnation, free to live a new life, free as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. Her adultery carried the penalty of death. Jesus was willing to pay that price for her. What started as the greatest horror she could imagine ended as the greatest day of her entire life. Praise the power and grace of Jesus Christ. This is what he does. This is what he is. This is why he came to this planet. This is what he offers every man, woman, boy, and girl. What an amazing example of what Jesus is all about right here in this story. So let's look at some ramifications of this event, and then we'll move on to some things to think about it really quickly. First, this really sets up the transition between the Pharisees thinking they can simply arrest Jesus and kill him to instead Jesus teaches in the temple for the next 2 months. For the Pharisees, this was a crushing defeat that will linger. The Pharisees were manhandled. And it's not just a public outmaneuvering. This is a spiritual demoralizing. Jesus said, those without sin may cast this first stone, and the Pharisees who prided themselves on sinlessness walked out in shame, fully aware that they were sinful. That is not an experience they're going to easily get over. He won spiritually. He impacted the way they even saw themselves. It was not going to be comfortable. This was a devastating loss. They left convicted of their sin. They left in shame, and everyone knows they left. What did this do to their reputation? They left, and their leaving said, I know I'm sinful. It was a profession of sin to leave. The statement of I have no sin would have been to pick up a rock and heave it at her face. They confessed their sin publicly by leaving. They left in shame. For Jesus, this was a political victory, a religious victory, an emotional victory, and a spiritual victory. And Jesus didn't even start the fight. His opponents came smug and arrogant and left not just with the shame of failure, but with an actual shame they could not deny, the shame of their own sin. It is little wonder, after a resounding smackdown like this, that they decide to let the Romans kill him instead. The tone of their interactions from this point changes. They are less confident. They lack the resolve to remove Jesus. They have not finished testing and resisting him, but it isn't going to be the same. They don't just talk about how we just need to get him and kill him. They're not that confident anymore. And Jesus isn't done thrashing them. There are some intense public exchanges coming up in the next few chapters where Jesus says some very hard things. And I hope you've already seen some principles from the passage, but just in case we missed them, let's make sure they are spelled out. So here's some things we need to make sure. Takeaways. First of all, we as human beings are in no place to condemn anyone. If Jesus said he did not come to condemn, and we decide that we will condemn, that we've put ourselves and Jesus on opposite sides. We have made ourselves an opponent of Jesus, and this isn't going to end any better for us. It's really very simple. Don't do it. I'm not saying that we can't talk about right and wrong. I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying that we can't judge rightly about wise and foolish, godly and ungodly, biblical and unbiblical. And I'm not saying that a society shouldn't have laws for the organization and protection of people. I am not talking about that. I'm saying that ultimate judgment and the right to withhold forgiveness does not belong to us ever. We have no business condemning anyone. Number 2, some things are better ignored. Jesus ignored some things. We can ignore some things. Sometimes what people are saying and doing don't deserve the dignity of a response. We don't have to play everyone's games. We don't have to get involved in everybody's arguments. Jesus never dealt with issues the way that his attackers expected. Like this is just a theme throughout everything you ever read about Jesus. They come thinking it's all going to go one way, and Jesus goes a completely different tangent, like every time. In wisdom, he avoided arguing with people who wouldn't listen and found ways to simply not play their game. And sometimes that's the right path for us as well. We do not have to embroil ourselves and give in to arguments that are pointless. We don't have to. Number 3, everybody has failure and brokenness. Sometimes we feel as if we're such good people. And other times we feel as if we're the failure and everybody else is perfect, but I'm such a failure and I'm such a goof up and I'm such a slime ball. Everyone else is fine. There is no one in this room right now that wouldn't have had to have left the room when Jesus is challenged. I would have had to have left the room when Jesus said, "Let he who throws the first stone show that they have no sin." When Jesus gave that challenge, I would have left too. The wrongs in our heart suddenly lit up by his glory. That's us. Humility, patience, gentleness, kindness often grow from a realistic view of our own faults. But there's power available to change, and we're going to get to that as well. But first, let's look at number 4. Ultimately, we deal with Jesus alone. In the end, when the woman and Jesus finally interact for the first time, her accusers are gone. I don't know who has accused you or condemned you in this life. Maybe your parents have. Maybe a pastor or some other religious leader has. Maybe your spouse or your kids or your siblings have condemned you. Maybe old friends or bosses or other acquaintances have condemned you. Maybe even the law, a police officer or a judge has condemned you. And maybe you hear their voices in your head telling you that you're not good enough, you can't win, you'll never amount to anything, you're always wrong. I don't know what voices you have to struggle with in your head of the things that human beings have said to you. I'm telling you that when you're with Jesus, they're not there. Trust me, when it comes to meeting with Jesus, they'll have their own problems. Meet with Jesus, confess he is Lord, and he will not condemn you. Every person in this room has someone who would condemn them. Those people, whoever they are, have no vote. Jesus alone deserves to make that choice. And he chooses to forgive you and restore you. Last one, number 5. Go and sin no more. When Jesus said that, it may not have been an easy request to obey. If the woman was married, she might not be after this. This was a public and embarrassing moment, and the husband could divorce her the moment she gets home. He could say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and that'd be the end of it. She'd be on the street. If she was a prostitute, she still didn't have a new job. Circumstances haven't changed. The reason she did it in the first place is still there. Neither situation is going to make it easy to avoid adultery again. Jesus isn't an idiot. He knows that, yet he commands it anyway. Forgiveness is not an excuse for our sin. It's the solution we need to get out of it. If the Holy Spirit can empty the room of her accusers, he can empower her to live different. And that's what Jesus is saying and counting on. This place of non-condemnation, it's not a place where anything goes. Do whatever you like, be whatever you think you want to be. It's a place where no failure is so great that it cannot be overcome by grace. Power is available to forgive, to fix, to heal, and to change. This episode in the life of Jesus shows us that it's not the curious or the proud that are blessed. It's the condemned who call Jesus Lord. Those people he will not despise, but forgive and heal and restore and change. Let's pray.
You've been listening to Oasis by the Sea. Thank you so much for joining us today. May God richly bless you until we see you next week at the Oasis.